Mia caught a cold after attending the swordsmanship tournament. In her delirium, she dreamed of her exclusive maid who avoided her to escape the cold, and other past events, including indifference to a girl named Chloe. Upon waking, she found Anne and Chloe caring for her, showing kindness Mia didn't return in the past. Confusing dreams with reality, Mia confronted her feelings of guilt. Meanwhile, in her waking moments, she navigates interactions with her classmates and her archnemesis, reflecting in how different her life is from the previous timeline.
You're making this rather difficult, Lord Radner. Paying taxes is vital to the well-being of the Empire. I'm sure that you're well aware of your obligation as a noble to pay them.
Ludwig said to the middle-aged man standing before him. They were in the manner of Lord Radner, and judging from the ugly grimace on the man's face, it was obvious that he wasn't pleased to see Ludwig.
As you can see, here's the amount that you reported to the Golden Moon Ministry.
Ludwig said as he handed over a piece of parchment with numbers written on it.
And here is the tax revenue that you actually collected from your territory. I'm sure you will notice a discrepancy. That should tell you the purpose of my visit today.
He stopped himself from adding, "You thieving bastard," but he could not withhold a tisk.
Parchment isn't cheap, you know, and I'm wasting it on you.
Certainly, certainly. It's not that I do not want to pay, you know. It's just, I can't help to think what would happen if Lord Bluemoon were to hear of this. Lord Bluemoon is one of the 4 dukes of Tearmoon, and he is the leader of the faction that Baron Radner belongs to. That a good friend of his being harassed so aggressively over the matter of taxes. Surely you understand my concern. Lord Radner tried to look as intimidating as he could, but Ludwig simply shrugged.
Of course, I am perfectly aware that if Lord Bluemoon were to learn that a tax issue was going to sour his relationship with Her Highness, it would be problematic for you.
While saying this, Ludwig looked at Radner over his glasses. Seeing that his threat was useless against Ludwig, Radner's expression clouded with unease. As Ludwig's statement fully dawned on him, he realized the precariousness of this situation. If Duke Bluemoon hears about this, then the Duke would have to consider whether Radner was worth protecting if it came at the cost of worsening Mia's impression of him. Between a lord and the princess, which way would the scales tip? In reality, of course, the Duke of Bluemoon would undoubtedly be filing a formal complaint if he hears that a lowly Golden Moon official was harassing a noble from his own faction. Even with the backing of Princess Mia, Duke Bluemoon is still a formidable foe. The 4 dukes hold great influence and power in the Empire that even the princess herself has to tread lightly around them, never mind a government official like him. That is why it was vital that Ludwig assume this attitude and project confidence. Any signs of apprehension might allow Radner to see through him. Noticing that the Baron was shaken, Ludwig continued his attack.
I'm just asking that the correct amount be paid. The discrepancy between your original report and your late payment is not a big concern. Her Highness has no intention of taking issue with such matters, as she had said, and I quote, "Anyone can make a mistake."
Ludwig was making it clear that as long as he pays up, then he was willing to let the whole thing slide. Instead of submitting a false tax return, the incident will be recorded as an error in accounting. It would be seen as a delayed payment instead of tax evasion. It was the perfect example of carrot and stick, and Lord Radner immediately bit it. Well, in that case, I shall have the money prepared immediately. After coming all this way, I can't have you go back empty-handed, can I? Also, if you don't mind, when you see Her Highness, I would really appreciate it if you can put in a good word for me.
Very well. Consider it done.
Ludwig gave one final disgusted glance at Radner before turning away, feeling the strong desire to let out a deep sigh.
Sweet moons. It is as if these people aren't even thinking.
Ludwig was rubbing his temples, nursing the mild migraine he had since coming back to his office in the Golden Moon Ministry.
Why commit such obvious fraud? You're just going to get caught. You'd avoid looking up like an idiot. If only all nobles were as wise as Her Highness, my job would be a lot easier. Well, a man can dream, can't he?
Hey, are those new wrinkles on your face? or are you just happy to see me?" Ludwig was startled and looked up to see a man standing before his door. The man had a rich crop of blonde hair with a well-trimmed beard, his intelligent brown eyes matching his charming smile. Ludwig smiled upon seeing this man.
Ah, Balthazar. It's been a long time. When did you come back to the capital?
"I just arrived this afternoon. I heard you were looking for me, so I came here directly." Balthazar Brandt was an old friend of Ludwig and works at Scarlet Moon Ministry. He was born into a comfortable life as the third son of a count. Regardless, the trappings of luxury had failed to quench the flame of his talent. Seeking to test the extent of his gifts, he went to the capital to study under the most prestigious scholar. It was there that he met Ludwig. After passing the Scarlet Moon Ministry exam, he started making a name for himself as a young and capable official.
I did not think that we would meet so soon. It looks like luck is on my side.
Ludwig did not request a meeting with Balthazar just to reminisce about the good old days. Even now that he has the backing of the Princess of Tearmoon, he is still just a public servant. In the Golden Moon Ministry where he worked, he was quite vocal about abolishing policies that tend to favor only the nobility, and he made sure that taxes were collected fairly and impartially. There were always people like Lord Radnor, whose deep connections and obstinacy gave even his peers pause. He had gone as far as to pay personal visits to them. Because of this, he is often in conflict with the factions of the four dukes, and he earned himself a reputation among noble circles as a meddling kid who was a thorn in their sides. However, that was the extent of his accomplishments. There was a limit on what he could do, as he is just an official of the Golden Moon Ministry, whose job only covers taxation and financial matters. He was only a small entity against the whole empire. If he wanted to fix the empire, he needed friends, comrades who shared his vision and supported the same cause. The two of them went to a familiar restaurant and sat down in a private room. Balthazar immediately asked, "So, what's the deal? Did you just call me to show off your new wrinkles?"
Would you quit it with the wrinkles? I swear. Well, it is true that I have been busy lately. I can feel the fatigue catching up with me.
"I've heard. You have been stepping on a lot of toes lately. You are seriously cracking down on those nobles." Balthazar came from the upper crust of nobility, so it wasn't surprising that he had heard rumors. "My parents back at home have been talking about you, you know. But don't get the wrong idea. They would never be involved in any suspicious activities."
I know.
Ludwig gave a mocking smile, to which Balthazar replied with a sardonic smile of his own. "Of course, feel free to punish them if you catch them doing something shady. Don't go easy on them on account of me. All these tax evasions can bring the empire to its knees. That is why we should always be watchful of forces that plan to corrupt the moral fiber of the empire." Balthazar was a patriot and a rationalist. It would not be surprising if he would not spare even his own family if faced with their wrongdoing. It is this absolutism that Ludwig admired the most about him.
You're absolutely right. But there is something more concerning than tax fraud. It is the discrimination within the empire that is firmly entrenched.
Discrimination, huh? While talking, the server arrived with their drinks. Balthazar took a sip and faced Ludwig to challenge him on his claim. "I admit that there is discrimination towards some minor tribes in remote regions, but is it really a big problem to be concerned with? Things seem fine to me right now."
You're joking, right? Listen, the truth is, I actually proposed this to Lord Radnor already. I asked him if he would be willing to open his land to cultivation. His barony might not be that big, but it's flat and has rivers. It is perfect for growing crops. I even offered him subsidies. Want to guess how that went? It was like talking to a wall.
Balthazar folded his arms and nodded. "Yeah, that's not surprising. I don't think there would be a lot of nobles who are willing to turn their lands into farms." The tendency to look down on farmers and agriculture, the low rate of self-sufficiency it caused, and the enormous importation costs that were required to sustain the supply of food. These were the issues that kept Ludwig up at night.
Unless we can find a solution to this problem, I am afraid that there is no future for the empire.
The discrimination against agriculture in the empire can be traced back to its very roots. The land that the Tearmoon Empire currently occupied was a fertile region once known as the Crescent Belt. A seed sowed there would easily reap 10 or even 20 times more been seed planted anywhere else. The people that originally lived in the regions lived through farming. They lived easy lives with abundant resources and plenty of harvests. They had very little conflict, until they were invaded by a tribe of hunters. This tribe used their hunting skills for war, and so they were able to quickly subjugate the original inhabitants. Thenceforth, the conquered natives were mocked by their new rulers. These new rulers called them the slaves of the land. They were ridiculed and called spineless and talentless. They were given labels such as those without the courage to hunt and those with no talent but that of tilling the land. After gaining access to a steady source of food and supply of laborers in the form of their new serfs, the invaders grew richer and richer. At some point, these hunters began calling themselves as nobles, and the man who was their tribe leader became the first emperor of the newly formed empire. From that time, the farmers had always occupied the bottom spot of the social hierarchy of the empire. Even when the archaic system of serfdom was abolished a long time ago, the discrimination remained alive and well, stemming from the deeply rooted notion that farming was for those who lacked talent to do anything else. The result of this was that nowadays, nobles were unwilling to use their land for agriculture. Of course, it isn't like the nobles altogether prohibit farming, but they only farm the bare minimum, and, if they can, they prefer to rely on imports. This is why the last thing that they want is that their territories be turned into farmlands. This is the ultimate irony of Tearmoon, an empire built upon vast swaths of fertile land that despised its own blessing. That twisted concept is now what Ludwig is fighting against. The towering opponent he intended to do battle with was none other than the very history and tradition of the empire itself.
In our current state, we're totally relying on food imports from the neighboring kingdoms. This situation is too risky. If they suffer a famine, those kingdoms will surely prioritize themselves. So, unless we increase our domestic production and be self-sufficient, then the empire has no future.
True, but what you are saying to change the current mindset and situation will be very difficult. Balthazar grimaced as he was already considering the implications of forcing the noble to farm. Seeing that his prey had taken the bait, Ludwig leaned forward.
The reason I wanted to meet with you is to ask about the state of things in the edges of the empire. Those outland nobles, how are they doing?
Probably exactly as you suspect. The areas that were newly absorbed into the empire were known as the imperial outlands, and so the rulers of those regions were commonly called outland nobles. They had already been farming even before being part of the empire, thus they felt no shame in tilling the land. Since they became part of the Tearmoon, however, they were ridiculed by the central nobles. They were seen as country bumpkins and despitefully called outland nobles. Of course, this was causing a lot of resentment and anger. Soon, even the outland nobles will follow the ways of the others and will reduce their farmlands. The Scarlet Moon Ministry has rules that set a limit on the amount of farmland that can be repurposed. But as long as there is money, the rules can be bent. There was a growing desire among outland nobles to use their land for purposes other than farming. It wasn't as strong as in the central nobility, but the trend was clear. Count Rudolfin is one of the few exceptions. He is determined to keep his lands for farming, but nobles like him are hard to find. Balancing the supply and demand was getting difficult every day, even with the import of food from other countries. There is a noticeable slow decline in the amount of food harvest. Though not yet fatal, the decline is nevertheless there, slowly and surely. Ludwig couldn't help but see it as a poison that, drop by drop, was being fed into the mouth of an unsuspecting empire. On that note, what about our dear princess, who you keep on talking about? Does the wisdom of the empire have a grasp of the problems that we are facing? Ludwig, who until moments before had been steeping in a quagmire of his own pessimism, perked up at the mention of Mia. Although the situation of the empire may seem to be heading to its doom, there is still hope, and Ludwig fully knows where that hope comes from.
I received a letter from Her Highness yesterday. It was the first one that she had sent since leaving for the academy. She wrote that she attended her first meet and greet party. Guess who was hosting it?
Who?
Heterogen agricultural country.
Whew. Now that is interesting. Heterogen agricultural country is a country in the southwest border of Tearmoon, with farmers comprising 80% of its population, and though its land was fairly large in size, their military and economic power is weaker than that of Tearmoon. As a result, they were regarded as a minor country barely worthy of consideration. Mentions of Peregrine were frequently accompanied by such remarks as second-rate, a country of serfs, and undeveloped and uncivilized. Sadly, the prejudice from the Tearmoon nobles blinded them from the truth. Most of the food imported into the empire actually came from the country that they looked down on. In choosing derision and ignorance over blatant facts, they effectively proved how gravely they suffered from this disease of thoughtlessness. A country that is looked down upon by nobles but is actually vital to the empire. If the princess did this out of diplomatic insight, then the implications are... Holy moons!
This is Her Highness we're talking about, you know? I wouldn't be surprised if it was all calculated. But that's not the end of it. Guess what happened next? Rania, listen. I know I have said this before, but I will say it again. Do not under any circumstance show any discourtesy to the guests from the Tearmoon Empire.
Yes, father. I won't show them any discourtesy. Rania Tafrif Peregrine, the third princess of Peregrine agricultural country, gave a rote answer. Her reluctant expression was hidden by the veil she was wearing over her face.
I must tell you again how important the empire is when it comes to our industries.
Don't worry, father. I will do my best so that everything will proceed smoothly. She has been hearing the same thing over and over again for years, since she started attending St. Noel Academy. Not that it matters. It's not like anyone worthwhile is going to show up in the empire. Well, she'd be lucky if they even show up in the first place. But she kept her arguments at heart and did not voice them out to her father. She wasn't always like this. When she was a child, she was already aware of her responsibility as Peregrine princess to take care of her kingdom's future. With those ideals, she enrolled at St. Noel Academy. Every year in the earlier spring, the Peregrine students would host a meet and greet where they would invite the Tearmoon students. This was the goal of having friendly relations and that the young Tearmoon nobles could taste the food and crops of Peregrine. The Tearmoon students in the future would inherit the titles of their parents, and getting on friendly terms with them early on would benefit Peregrine in the future. This was what the party was for. During her first year at St. Noel Academy, she dedicated her heart and soul into preparing for this event. She researched the best recipes, used the best ingredients, and spent many sleepless nights to make sure that only the best of the best would be served to the Tearmoon students. However, reality betrayed her. When the day of the event came, only a handful of the Tearmoon students showed up. Even more, all of those who showed up were from lower-ranking noble families. Adding insult to injury, it was clear from their listless expressions that they were only forced to attend the event and none of them wanted to be there. At first, Rania could not understand such behavior. What was the reason for such a sad turnout of attendance and such a rude attitude from their visitors? The answer came from, of all people, her older sister.
They see us as a country of serfs, second-rate, tributary.
These were the terms that were used by the Tearmoon nobles in describing Peregrine. She learned that her sister had done the same thing years before, enduring the same humiliation just to entertain an ungrateful bunch of Tearmoon nobles. There was nothing she could do but clench her teeth, make a tight fist, and swallow her anger deep in her heart by putting on a smile. The truth hurts, the truth that the weak has no other choice but to endure. If the diplomatic relations between Peregrine and Tearmoon would sour, then war would be unavoidable. And if that happened, Peregrine would be crushed like a gnat. Ever since that day, she had lost all passion. And now, the annual event was again approaching this year and she was no longer looking forward to it. Just imagining what might happen made her want to vomit. Her reluctance was within reason. Nobody looked forward to having the fruits of their painstaking labor mocked as cheap country food. I hate this. I wish this event would just get cancelled. While thinking about such a thing, an idea came to her. Since it is nothing but just a cheap show, I might as well have some fun. Rania decided to play a prank on her soon-to-be ungrateful visitors. Looking at all the delicious and beautiful dishes of food that will be presented in the party, she secretly added in some preserved food that had gone long stale. With agriculture being its primary industry, Peregrine invested heavily in researching techniques to preserve grains, allowing them to keep for much longer. Though flavor did suffer, it was a small difference that can only be noticed by an expert tongue. Since Tearmoon usually sent second-tier nobles, they would never be able to tell the difference. Rania smiled to herself while imagining the clueless idiots that would happily eat stale food. She knew it was petty of her to do so, but at least she would get some fun out of it. But alas, in what seemed to be a karma for her mischievous plans, her mischief came back to haunt her sooner than expected. When the guests arrived at the party, Rania's jaw hit the floor.
Princess Rania, I extend my most sincere gratitude for the invitation to this beautiful party filled with so many splendid foods.
Why? How come?
I am Mia Luna Tearmoon, Princess of the Tearmoon Empire. It is my greatest pleasure to make your acquaintance.
The one who's leading the Tearmoon students was none other than the VIP of VIPs, the dear daughter of the reigning emperor, Princess Mia herself. Okay, deep breaths. Deep breaths. I need to calm down. Rania, you need to calm down. The pleasure is all mine, Your Highness. I am Rania Tafrif Peregrine, third princess of Peregrine Agricultural Country. I thank you for coming to this party. Please enjoy all these delicious foods from my country. Huh? She said, bowing deeply. When she looked up, however, her breath caught in her throat. Princess Mia, with her deep blue eyes and crystalline gaze, was looking at her straight to her face. Your Highness?
Eh? Oh, my apologies. Please do not mind me.
Mia's cool response failed to calm down the hard beating of Rania's heart. It's like she's able to see right through me. It was then that Rania remembered something important. The well-known Princess Mia Luna Tearmoon had another title. She was also called the Wisdom of the Empire. Was she able to see through my prank? No, that can't be. She can't possibly know. I mean, there are plenty of snacks and sweets that it's basically impossible for her to choose that one. Yeah, I should be fine, she thought as she ran her gaze across the variety of platters that covered the tables. There were so many of them, probably as many as the butterflies she was feeling in her stomach.
Eh? Oh, my apologies. Please do not mind me.
After staring at Rania's face for a while, Mia shook her head. She observed that Rania has a beautiful tan, and there was a charming beauty to her features. Her dark hair had soaked in the color of the night sky, and her eyes glowed with the deep green of a lush summer forest.
All right. I do remember her features being something like this. Now that I gotten a good look, though, I won't forget again.
Mia was feeling satisfied with herself after being able to make a mental note of Rania's face. Her thoughts wandered to a memory from the previous timeline. It was during the year when the Empire had been struck by a great famine. During that time, Ludwig had been working hard trying to import enough food for the Empire.
Your Highness, if I might be so bold as to speak frankly about my frustrations. Actually, you might not. We were about to negotiate with the country that can't really help us, right? And the princess attended the academy at the same time as you, right? Then, why is that? You can't remember what she looks like. I just said you might not.
Ludwig paid no attention to Mia's protest and continued with his lecture.
I am sure that you are aware that the reason why the children of nobles are sent to Saint Noel Academy is to build relationships and facilitate diplomacy. I trust you are aware of this very basic fact, right? Of course I know that. I feel sorry for what happened.
What had happened was a failure of negotiations entirely because of Mia. After a series of invites and talks, Ludwig was able to finally invite Peregrine to come over for a negotiation deal with the third princess of Peregrine and her delegate. However, when Mia arrived at the negotiation table, she said something that sent everything crashing down into a fiery disaster. She looked at the princess and asked, "Oh my, and who might you be?" Ludwig once again looked at Mia, who in a rare moment of honest remorse looked truly crestfallen.
Well, they probably were waiting for us to slip up so they could use it as an excuse to turn us down anyway. Really? I wouldn't be too surprised if they were. It isn't only our empire that has been struck by the famine. All throughout the continent, the harvests have been terrible. Everybody needs food. Probably even Perugin themselves. Even if they were willing to meet and talk with us, they might have just been looking for an excuse to refuse us.
It was very rare for Ludwig to offer sympathy to Mia. Immediately following that, though,
Having said that, it is still inexcusable to forget the faces of royalty and powerful nobles of the other countries and kingdoms, especially if you had seen them a lot of times at the academy before. You better reflect on your mistake, Your Highness. I am already. You don't need to keep on telling me.
for the rest of that day, Mia choked back her tears as she had to endure the non-stop lecturing from a very irritated Ludwig. Since that day, Mia started making a genuine effort to figure out which people were important contacts and trying her hardest to remember their faces. Which was good, of course, but not really worth bragging about. It is my honest desire that this wonderful event will join the Tearmoon Empire and Perugin country closer. Now let the party begin? At Rainia's prompting, the party did indeed begin. It was sort of a hybrid between a buffet style and a classic tea party. The food on the tables were mostly snacks and fruits. The drinks were different kinds of black and herbal teas. The whole party had an atmosphere of a calm, refined afternoon break. As Mia scanned the available delicacies, she felt her eyes being pulled toward the cakes, and then the tarts, and then...
What a selection! They surely live up to their names as an agricultural country.
Mia was deeply impressed, and the children of the Marquises and counts that joined her also voiced their admiration and praise for the foods. Even some of the girls who wanted to belittle the food couldn't help but give in to the temptation of such appetizing sweets. Nothing fights discrimination like a good pastry. Granted, the fact that Mia was the one to lead headfirst into the tasting tour of all the foods might have been a factor. Just to be clear, it wasn't Mia's intention to change the mindset of her fellow Tearmoon nobles. The only thing going through her head at the time was the urge to stuff her face with food. An obvious fact, perhaps, but still worth mentioning. After making the rounds on most tables, Mia found her gaze drawn to one particular plate off to the side.
My, those cookies.
There was nothing exceptional about the cookies. Surrounded by the different colors of fruits and pastries, the only thing that was exceptional about the cookies were how bland and normal they looked. No, wait, that's... For some reason, Rainia was madly dashing forward towards Mia with a panic-stricken face. She couldn't care less about elegance as she ran towards Mia. Mia wasn't sure why, but she could find out later. For now, the cookies were more important. She picked one up, popped it in her mouth.
Ah, I know this. This taste. This is it.
The sweet, crumbly texture spread across her tongue. The cheap, sugary taste immediately brought back her long, dreary days in the dungeon. Even with the dark, depressing days in there were a few beautiful moments. Just once, Anne brought her these cookies. The Empire was already facing a shortage before the revolution. Sometimes for weeks, Mia would have nothing sweet to eat. When she was imprisoned, the quality of her food drastically dropped to the point that she almost forgot that eating could be enjoyable. Then Anne gifted her these cookies. When she was able to taste the sweetness, her bliss was more than what she could ever express. Emotions came rushing back as she relived this moment. Mia began to tear up.
This taste. This texture. It has been such a long time.
I'm very sorry, Your Highness. Mia turned around to find Rainia staring at her with a look of sheer terror.
Huh? For what?
Mia was again not sure of what had happened, but based on Rainia's lack of color in her face, she judged it to be something serious. Just in case, she took Rainia and the plate of cookies to a quiet part of the hall. One does not simply eat only a single cookie. Whatever was wrong, she could hopefully smooth things out herself. If word got out and her retinue made a big fuss, they might ruin relations with Perugin entirely. The last thing she wanted was to receive a scolding from Ludwig like last time. Out of her fear to be scolded, she had done something pretty tactful. About those cookies. They were actually made 3 years ago.
3 years ago?
Mia couldn't believe what she had just heard, and so she stared at Rainier. Rainier's face just turned even paler. I didn't mean it. I apologize. It was meant to be a silly prank. The Perugian princess was shaking in fear as she apologized. She bowed in apology profusely, but Mia did not even flinch or react. In fact, Mia had stopped paying attention at all. She was still stunned upon learning the truth about cookies.
These cookies were made 3 years ago? And they're still edible? Not only edible, but still delicious?
Mia had seen the famine. I digress. Mia felt the famine. The world without food felt like a living hell. The unpleasant taste of the rye bread that she was forced to eat because there was no other food had left a foul taste on her tongue that she vividly remembers. Because of Tearmoon's discrimination, agricultural techniques such as food preservation were hardly known. They were never able to preserve their harvests for too long, even more so to maintain their quality. Mia held up the cookies, regarding them with awe. Their existence was extraordinary. She understood their significance. They were like golden coins. No, probably even more valuable than that. Then suddenly in Mia's mind, everything seemed to click. She understood, or thought she did, why Rainier presented the cookies as one of the foods in the party.
I understand now. She's showing me how good Perugian technology is at preserving food. We are their customers after all. The food today is not just for feasting, but also a showcase of the products that they sell. Or something. I remember Ludwig saying something to that effect. Probably.
He had lectured her for so long that she had ignored most of what he said. Anyways.
In that case, Princess Rani is really incredible. She really knows what she's doing.
Mia gulped as she eyed the golden treasures she held in her hand. In a soft voice, she mused.
I see. So this is Perugian food preservation technique. Absolutely incredible.
Rainier was surprised upon Mia's words. She stared at the Tearmoon princess, barely able to process what she had heard. She thought that she would be on the receiving end of a scolding, instead of what she was hearing was praise. The Princess of Tearmoon is praising Perugian technology? How? Why? In the world as she knew it, people from the Empire had nothing but ridicule and contempt for them. The research and technology that they put into their farming had never been recognized before. She had given up hope. But now, could it be that Princess Mia is someone who will recognize the value of our technology? Will she then treat us as equals?
Princess Rania, there is something I wish to discuss with you if I can have a moment of your time.
Oh, of course. After speaking for a while, the two princesses sealed a firm handshake. So, a miraculous partnership and friendship was born through mutual misunderstanding. As for where this peculiar project will take them, it's still a few volumes away. So, the food preservation technique of Perugian agricultural country. We can gain access to their research and technology while they gain access to funding. That's a pretty good deal. But didn't you say that the Empire is suffering from a pretty bad case of greedy noble syndrome?
I had a budget set aside for those who wanted to change their territories into farmland. As you know, that has been largely unsuccessful as of yet. So, I was thinking, using that money for this joint venture, it's a better use of time and money than trying to convince some hard-headed nobles.
Well, with food preservation that will at least ignite their interest. Then once you have visible results, then you might be able to change the thinking of the nobles. After that, it will be easier to convince them to repurpose their territories for farming. That is brilliant. It seems that you have really thought this through.
Honestly, I sometimes wish that we would have a famine. That way, I wouldn't have to waste my words convincing the nobles.
Whoa! Slow down there for a second. You might be asking more than you can chew there.
Just joking, of course. But tell me what you think after hearing all of this. While it might not fill you with optimism, at least it shows you that there is indeed hope.
If all of this is true, then the princess is really a very intriguing person. Balthazar raised his mug of ale. To the wise princess, who appeared like magic to my good friend. Ludwig did not raise his mug. Instead, he looked at his friend seriously through his glasses and declared in a serious voice,
To Her Wise Majesty, the future Empress of Tearmoon.
"Are you serious?"
All for the sake of restoring the Empire. So, for that goal, I wish to enlist you as well.
Ludwig said while staring straight into Balthazar's eyes. Balthazar held his friend's gaze. Then he looked up at the ceiling, scratched his head, and finally gave out a laugh. "The first Empress in the history of Tearmoon, huh? We're going to have to pull strings until our arms fall off." Meanwhile, Mia was completely oblivious to the powerful political undercurrents that were brewing underneath her. She would later learn of their plans and suffer a minor meltdown as a result. But that is a story best saved for later.
This is it for this video. We will continue with the story of the Guillotine Princess in the next episode. It was Marco and Brian from Jobless Weaves. Matane!